I'm John Cleary, and I'm delighted to have been invited to be your host for this evening's Conversations, Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together. They're organised by the Affinity Intercultural Foundation. In times of stress, we call on the personal and the support of friends and neighbours. Well, not so this year. COVID-19 has cast its shadow over all of us. And this year, for the Muslim community, the burden is felt particularly acutely as COVID coincides with Ramadan, the period of reflection and fasting and community building. Last year, the Affinity Foundation hosted over 45 house iftars and 10 institutional iftars, including up to 350 guests. This year, Affinity has decided to carry Ramadan to an online performance via these online Ramadan Conversations. Subtitle, We're All in This Together. Our guests will include parliamentarians, religious leaders, community leaders, academics and sports celebrities from around the world, including New Zealand, America, the UK, Asia, Europe and Africa. And this evening, I'd like to welcome the first of our co-hosts, Abdullah Aksu. Abdullah was born and raised in Australia and currently holds the position of owner and director of Innovo Technology Solutions, an Australian IT services company, and he's also the chairman of the Muslim-based multi-faith school, Ahmadi College. Abdullah, welcome to this first conversation.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really looking forward to tonight.
I guess somebody's got an expertise in IT and technology breakthroughs, but you choose also to be on the board of a college like Ahmadi College, which takes a very special interest in education. Join the dots for us.
So I think my interest in education and doing something for the community sort of really started when I was young. Growing up down in Wollongong, a Turkish background, the Turkish community really didn't have much back then. We had a mosque, and that was about it. I went to school in the local primary schools and high schools, and I was lucky enough to enroll in a Bachelor of Engineering at Wollongong University. And while I was studying, I was always getting pulled in to assist the local mosque. So if there was ever a meeting to be held with a local council member, or if there was any DA applications, BA applications, whatever it may be, there was always, the one Turkish guy that's going to uni, he can come along and he can help us out from a translation perspective. So it was about learning about the value of putting back into the community. So once I completed my education and I heard about a group of people that were very interested in creating a school of our own here, people from a Turkish background, this made a lot of sense to me. And this was something that I thought could really benefit the community, given that I had been doing a lot of community work with the mosque down in Wollongong. So I thought if there's something that I want to spend a lot of my time in, that would be it. So outside of my IT career, I believe that working for yourself and working for your family isn't the end all and be all. There needs to be more that you can do in your life. And I think picking a worthy cause, as education is, was my calling in life, I would say. And so I've been active with the school for 20 plus years, and I've recently been very... Go on, John.
I'll pursue that in a moment, but some people might see a paradox here with IT and community in that they see social media as destroying community. So, you're working for the wrong side of the tracks, pal. How do you deal with those tensions?
Well, social media is all about the individual, isn't it? And look how good I am. Look at me, and look. What about this? And look what I've done, and aren't I great, etc. The type of IT that I work in is different. We work with large corporates, and we're about helping those large telecommunications banks, large insurance companies, banks, etc. So I guess I'm always, even in the work that I work in, it's the service sector, I'm helping people. So it sort of makes sense to be helping large corporates as part of my normal career, but then putting into the community and trying to assist the community. So for me, it's just an extension of what I do from a day-to-day perspective.
There's also something quite distinctive about Amity as a school. It's not simply another faith-based school, is it? It has a unique, almost sort of interfaith, multi-faith dimension to it. Like, for instance, are Christian students welcome at Amity College?
Very much so, John. So we aren't an Islamic school. When we were created by people from Muslim background. And when we actually started the school, we were called Shule College. So it was created by people from a Turkish background. But we quickly saw that the school was embraced by the community in general, initially by the Muslim community, and then now the broader community. So very much so, our school is open to people of all faith. And we do have Christian students. We have different religious students attending our school. A lot of our staff are also non-Muslims as well. So we're very much open and very much multi-faith organisation and school.
So how do you address the values question in that context?
Values that we promote in our school are predominantly universal values. So they're values that are common, values that we all respect, we all admire, and we all live to. So being good to each other, respecting your elders, helping people out. Like in our schools, especially in the higher years, year 10, year 11, year 12, we teach our students to be socially responsible. So those types of projects are about looking out for those that are less fortunate. So I guess what we do is, yes, there is the Islamic background to the college. However, the universal values is the way that we address this with people from all different faiths.
Well, let me come to the week we're in. We've seen COVID-19 affect communities across the world dreadfully. It happens to coincide this year, this dreadful pandemic coincide with Ramadan. So I guess I'd put two questions together in one. How has COVID-19 impacted your world? But in particular, how has it caused you to reflect on Ramadan?
So I'll try to answer the first question. The impact of my life has been, I don't go into work. I haven't been into work for a number of weeks now. So I live in southwest Sydney. Normally it's a train trip all the way into the city. So that hasn't been happening. We're all working from home. So from my personal work perspective, it's become more difficult. I can't meet my clients, my staff that have been working for me. There's no face-to-face interaction. But, we're in IT and we're used to working in remote fashion and online fashion. So we're making do. From a family perspective, we're all at home. Personal space can be a bit of an issue when you've got a full house of people at times. You've got students that are studying at university. You've got primary school students, everyone together. So at times that can be a bit of a push. But the biggest difference, I guess, is that we're very family oriented. So, I haven't been able to go and visit my parents or my father-in-law, my mother-in-law for a number of weeks now. So that has really changed the dynamic. A number of things, the way that we normally do things has totally changed. When it comes to Ramadan, I guess, Alhamdulillah, today was the first day of Ramadan and we were able to complete our fast successfully. But if I look at some of the things that have changed, typically of an evening we would perform a prayer that's only performed in the month of Ramadan. It's called Taraweeh. And what happens there is we would go to a mosque or we would group and there would be a congregation where we would perform this prayer. So all of a sudden, the mosques are no longer open and we can't congregate in large numbers. So what happens? Dad becomes the imam. So last night I led my family in prayer. So that meant ensuring that I had all of the readings in place. So there was a lot of brushing up, a lot of preparation before Ramadan, but I was able to lead the family in prayer. And similar to that, look, Ramadan, as you know, John, you've been to many an affinity function. Ramadan is not just about abstaining from food or, just performing prayer. It's a time of getting together. It's a time of community. It's a time of family. So unfortunately, due to COVID, we're not going to be able to hold the Ramadan iftars that we used to hold so dear to our hearts. I'm not going to be able to invite my friends. They're not going to be able to invite me. And one thing, while we're talking about Ramadan iftars, one of the things that I used to have a lot of pleasure in doing was hosting Ramadan iftar dinners in my home, where I would have people of not the Islamic faith, but the people of Christian faith, Buddhist faith, whatever it may be. We would open our home and they would come to us and in our home, and we would break bread together. That was just an amazing feeling. And unfortunately, this year we're not going to be able to do that. Parliament Iftar is another event that Affinity hold, which once again is amazing as well. We're not going to be able to do that. But hopefully we're going to have to make do with what you're hosting here tonight, John, going forward for the rest of Ramadan. It's going to have to be done in this way. So the dynamics have changed in Ramadan, but it's a spiritual month. It's a month of reflection. It's a month of community, family, and there's a Turkish saying that I probably just want to finish the answering off. Ramadan is viewed as the sultan of all of the months. So if you look at the full calendar, Ramadan is the king of all of those months. So it is very dear to Muslims. And I guess when I reflect a little bit more, the world has become a global village, hasn't it? So the days of Muslims fasting in an isolated fashion in their town or in their own country, those days are gone. So we've seen that certain things that happen in some part of the world will impact others. So Ramadan's the same. Ramadan is a joyous time that should be felt by Christians, by Buddhists, by Hindus, by Jews as well, not just Muslim community. So when we fast and we celebrate with everyone together.
Abdullah, you set us up beautifully for the rest of our program this evening. So before we welcome our special guests, we should like to reflect particularly on Ramadan. And here with a recitation from the Holy Quran is Bilal Kilek, a teacher at Amity College.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم ومن كان مريضا أو على سفر فعدة من أيام أخر يريد الله بكم اليسر ولا يريد بكم العسر ولتكملوا العدة ولتكبروا الله على ما هداكم ولعلكم تشكرون وإذا سألك عبادي عني فإني قريب أجيب دعوة الداع إذا دعاني فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي أجيب دعوة الداعي إذا دعاني فليستجيبوا لي وليؤمنوا بي لعلهم يرشدون. صدق الله العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Thank you, Bilal. Bilal Kilic from Amity College in Sydney. I'm John Cleary. My co-presenter is a member of the board of Amity College, Abdullah Aksu, chairman of the board, in fact. You're with Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together. And right now, Abdullah, it's time to welcome our first special guest, Associate Professor Salih Yucel. Associate Professor Salih Yucel is a lecturer in Islamic Studies at the Centre for Islamic Studies and Civilisations at Charles Sturt University in Sydney. And before settling in Australia, he undertook various ecclesiastical roles for 10 years for the Ministry of Religious Affairs in Turkey, and he's also worked as a Muslim chaplain at Harvard Medical School's hospital in the United States, and is also a senior lecturer at Monash University. Salih Yucel, it's great to have you here for our Ramadan Conversations. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, John. Just a little correction. I was a senior lecturer at Monash. Now I am a part-time lecturer at Australian Catholic University.
Well, all distinguished positions. Just another one to add to your list.
Thank you for having me for such a program. It's a great pleasure for me to be on the program.
We'd like to take advantage of your background in looking at Islam around the world, but particularly the theology, and just continue some of the questions we spoke about with Abdullah, and that is the very nature and origin of Ramadan.
The question was not clear. Can you please repeat? Well, we are disconnected.
We're having a little problem with your with reception.
Well,
can you hear me now?
I don't know, John, whether it's yours or mine. Yes, probably it's mine.
You're coming through fine now.
I can't
well,
hear,
let me ask that
unfortunately.
again. Yeah. Take us into the background of Ramadan from your perspective as a scholar. Like, just how did it arise and what are the key significant elements in Ramadan? Particularly if we go to the meals. People love the meals.
Well, you know, before iftar, before the meal, my stomach was weeping, but all other organs were laughing. So this is the Ramadan, the first impact of the Ramadan. But then the stomach started laughing. However, the other organs are weeping now. Because they're back to work.
Very
Ramadan,
true. Very true.
First of all, it was a month of reflection and to appreciate what we have. Particularly we are blessed, to have almost everything that what we are looking for, and this is a great blessing. And second, Ramadan or fasting, it is not just in Islam, also it exists in other religions as well, too, in one way or in other ways. So therefore, I think by fasting also we can such as Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, to certain extent. By fasting, I think we are having some, particularly in Australia. And also,
Abdullah, perhaps I can pick up on some of that.
When we say
Yes, Salih?
Ramadan, generally three things come to our mind. Number one,
I think Salih is almost not listenable to at the moment. Perhaps, Abdullah, I can pick up a couple of those points with you on the significance of Ramadan.
Sure, John.
Salih's been speaking of.
soul, once unlimited free.
Yeah, John,
Also eating and
yeah, it's very difficult. So
it's very difficult.
Yeah, Abdullah, we might pick up with you on just elaborating a couple of those points. Do you know much about the historical origins of Ramadan yourself? Abdullah, can you hear me?
Just dropped out, John. So I think just going on what Salih, Salih was saying, the concept of fasting was also something that with the previous religions as well too, whether it be Judaism, Christianity, and then later on with Islam as well. It was a concept that existed previously and has gone through time. So I think that was the point that Salih Hojam was trying to make there. Hojam, are you with us now?
It's very, very difficult.
Very difficult, yeah. And I think he also talked a little bit about what I'd mentioned previously around the universal message, about Ramadan being a time of getting together and a time of spirituality, reflection, etc. So I think there was, from the bits that I caught, I must admit, because it wasn't very clear. So that's probably about all that I can add at this point in time.
When you are sitting with your friends around the time of Ramadan particularly, and you say, okay, we're going to have a day in which we fast and we just sort of, don't eat right through the day, and then we meet in the evenings, and after the sun goes down, we enjoy food and fellowship together. What do you find are the practical benefits of that for you?
So let's talk about the fast. So I guess for that period that we are abstaining from food, it isn't only food that we're abstaining from. So it's about bettering yourself as an individual. So it's staying away from things that are sinful, or trying to be as good as possible during that time as well too. So if there's habits that you've got, habits that aren't necessarily good, it's about abstaining from that as well as the food as well. So you've got a period of abstinence. In addition to that, it's about heightened spirituality. So some of the things that we do during the month of Ramadan are we become one with the Quran. So it's about the learnings within the Quran, the reading of the book, and living and breathing the Quran, the book itself. So during the day,
so there's structured
it's about that reflection as well.
Yeah. So there's structured studies we would do attend?
Yeah. So at the moment, there's a concept called a mukabele, which is the reading of one chapter per day, and then we would follow that as well. So you would have an imam that would be reading, and we would follow that. And personally, we would also aim to complete the Quran, reading the full Quran in a month. So that'll be a personal agenda of ours, or a goal that we would set. Then as the time gets closer, as Salih Hojam was saying, coming close to dinner, it's a time of reflection. We've gone hungry throughout the day, but in front of us we have a table full of bounties that God has given us. But what about those that are less fortunate? What about those that can't eat? What about those that can't drink? So it's a time of reflection and thinking about those that are less fortunate and being thankful for all that we have. And then once we sit down and we eat, again, with our friends, it's that reflection and giving thanks for all that God has given us. And we follow that up with prayers. So during that night, I mentioned earlier on in the beginning, we have this prayer called Taraweeh. And again, that is a special prayer that you only pray during Ramadan. Any other time in the year, that prayer is not prayed. So it's something that's special to Ramadan. So all of that sort of contributes to that heightened spirituality that we look to achieve during the month of Ramadan.
Salih, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can. Hopefully this time.
We're sorry we lost you there before. Can I just ask you one other question that related? I mentioned it earlier. If you take, and you mentioned this, if you take traditions like Christianity, the period of fasting in Christianity, similar to Islam, is a period of 40 days and 40 nights leading up to Easter, which is a memorial of the crucifixion of Jesus. So it's attached to an historical event. Is Ramadan attached to a certain historical event or period or a moment in the life of the Prophet?
Yes, definitely. First of all, Ramadan obliged after the migration to Medina, and what we know that the Prophet established a brotherhood between, we call, immigrants and the helpers, the Muslims in Medina. There are very interesting stories that they would share their food, their houses, and everything what they had. And similarly, it's in the whole day of the Prophet during the Ramadan, whatever during the daytime he received, he would stride ahead, give back to the poor and needies. And sometimes he would just break his fasting with just lit some water and maybe one date. So I think it is also altruism. It shows the altruism as well during the month of Ramadan. But more than that, I think the universal message of Ramadan is that we should, as Abdullah mentioned, think about those who are destitute. And also, I was reading in an article, I think a couple of years ago, when one of the prisoners of the war was taken to Manhattan after the Second World War. They asked him a question, what is impressive for you, in New York? So he pointed out with his finger the trash bins. He said, it is this. They shocked, how come? He said, look, the food you waste, if you would send to China, there wouldn't be a Second World War.
Yeah.
I think, yes, fasting is month of sharing, not just for Muslims as well as non-Muslims. But during this difficult time, I was reading a book. It inspired me to read books about pandemic in Islamic history. One of the great scholars, Ibn Hajar, he lost two of his daughters during a pandemic in Egypt. So he wrote a book around 400 pages. And the name of the book, it is The Virtues of Pandemic. I was shocked. How come there's a virtues of pandemic? Yes. Then he analyzes some...
Well, perhaps we could ask... Perhaps we could ask you to speculate tonight for us on what you see are the virtues that we can make of this particular pandemic. I mean, Ramadan falling in the midst of a pandemic turns it upside down in a way. It tells people to be socially isolated. So what do you see as the virtues in this pandemic? Possible
Good
virtues.
question, John. I think I'm taking it as a retreat. And also I'm now valuing the value of the freedom, how it is important. I think the third point, I am spending more time with my family. And fourthly, my house has become like a mosque. We pray 5 times together. Particularly, we started last night, we call Taraweeh, as Abdullah mentioned. We can't go to the mosque just during the Ramadan. So I think these are the virtues. But on the other hand, as I said, that Unfortunately, many people are suffering because of that, particularly the elders and those are sick in the hospital. So we hope and pray that the scientists and doctors can find a cure soon for such disaster for the humanity, because there's a saying of the Prophet that if God sent down a disease, also he sent the cure as well. So it's human responsibility to work out to find a vaccine for such disease, COVID-19. And hopefully we pray and we hope that they will find out soon.
Well, John,
Abdullah, can I bring you into the conversation here briefly?
Yeah, I just wanted to.
An observation.
Just a quick question. We have a lot of viewers from the Islamic faith, and we have gone into Ramadan. Are there a couple of reminders that you would like to pass on to all of us? What are the things that we need to concentrate on? What are the things that we need to focus on during the month of Ramadan?
Well, I think, every day I read again in an article that around 25,000 people are dying because of the lack of food or sanitation or, clean water in the world. I think we should not neglect them. And second, in many places there are conflicts, internal wars are going on, civil wars are going on. They have a lack of many things. I think also it's time to reflect on this as well. And the third point, if anything happens in any corner of the world, is going to affect the whole humanity, not just X or M country, not X or M people or faith groups. It's affecting to everyone. So that globalization made us like a global village. And I think we should find a way to work together, to live together, exist together peacefully. I think there is enough, everything, food or water, energy, sources for humanity, if we know how to share and how to care. By sharing and caring, I think we are also reducing the impact of greed in our nature. And finally, I would like to say that it's time to have solidarity as all human beings, not just Muslims, all human beings, to reduce the impact of COVID-19.
Professor Salih Yucel, that's a terrific message to leave with us this evening. Thank you so much for taking the trouble to be with us. We apologise for the slight transmission hiccup there when we began, but it was great to get your message at the conclusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Have a good night. Thank you to you all.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
Well, you're with Abdullah Aksu and me, John Cleary, for this special Ramadan series, Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together. And it's brought to you by the Affinity Intercultural Foundation. Well, Abdul, it's time now to introduce our next guest, Professor Clive Pierson. Clive has had a distinguished career as an educator, particularly in Christian ministry and the Uniting Church. He's one of the founding figures of the Global Network of Public Theology. He is also committed to nurturing the relationship between the Christian faith and the Muslim community in his home community of Sydney. And if that's not enough, he's an activist on what could be called the foundational theological issue, care for creation. That is, the environment is the most clear physical demonstration of a loving creator. Clive Pierson, welcome to our Ramadan Conversations.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Abdullah.
Thank you. Well, Clive, welcome,
Clive. Clive, we're in the middle of a pandemic. You're somebody who has an interest in creation and the physical world. Where does this fit in God's plan for the physical world?
Well, it's nice to start off, John, with a very big question, isn't it? No gentle entry. Because I think the question, that's a huge question. I find it rather interesting trying to reflect upon the intersection of a pandemic and climate change. People who have been writing on climate change, the climate emergency for some time, have been aware that changes in climate, changes in environment will actually provoke pandemics. Now, it's difficult to make any clear link between this present one and climate change emergency and such like, but it is a known factor that the way in which the world changes, that we are going to have more and more of these pandemics. And I suspect that in terms of how we subscribe to a God who is creator, so much then depends upon how we respond to these events and how we care, especially for those who are very, very vulnerable. And some people are more vulnerable than others.
When you say that, you're going to something that goes to some of the things that Salih said in our last discussion about the care in Ramadan for creation. You see, or he was suggesting care for the dispossessed. You see connections there that overlap, which takes us to your interest, your wider interests in links between the great religions.
Yes, several years ago, I gave a paper which was a development on the King of Jordan put out a statement, a common word between us. It was between you and me, sorry. And that was a Muslim invitation to Christians to consider how we love our neighbour. And because love of neighbour happens to occur in both religious traditions. And although the original document made no reference to the care of creation, in my own writing, I began to say, well, I think it is actually time for those of us who are both Christian and Muslim to be working together in terms of responding to issues like climate change. And I suppose I'm rather glad that I was able to provoke one of my Muslim colleagues to write on the Quranic response to the care of creation, and he'd never thought of that before. So the dialogues which can happen between faiths, I think, allow that kind of common concern for care of neighbour, and in some ways the creation itself is our neighbour. And I think that's a very important point to bring into mind as well.
So Clive, you talk about Christianity and Islam together. So we have entered into the holy month of Ramadan now, as you're aware. Can you talk a little bit about your past Ramadan experiences, and specifically, I think you may have attended some affinity functions as well. So if you could shed a bit of light on your experiences on Ramadan previously and affinity as well.
Yes. Well, my first exposure really to Islam was back in New Zealand, where I was a minister, and it was outside Ramadan. I was a congregational minister in Christchurch in Riccarton, the area where there was such a tragedy just over a year ago. And at that time, this is 30 years more ago, there was a little bit of Islamophobia featuring, and my congregation and I made contact with the Muslim community there, and that was my first exposure to Islam. We struck up a good relationship. I've been involved with Affinity for nearly 20 years, I think, in a whole variety of ways. Yes, we're on the eve of Anzac Day. Affinity took me to Turkey on one occasion, so I've been to the Gallipoli service with Muslim colleagues. In terms of Ramadan itself, I've participated in 10, 15 years worth of iftar meals, which I have thoroughly enjoyed, meeting not just the food, which has been great, and so different from my stock diet, but it's been most appreciated. But I think also the kind of hospitality, the welcome, and the kind of conversations which happen around the table, partly getting to know people, but also hearing the story, in many cases, if someone's come from Turkey or off Afghanistan, hearing them speak about their own homeland. I suppose one of the most striking iftar meals I ever attended was where the hostess had to leave in order to go and assist with someone giving birth in a nearby suburb. Wow. So that was a little bit different, that one, but it was quite exciting in a different kind of way. And I've also participated in the parliamentary iftar meals run by Affinity, and I think they have been wonderful occasions, not just because of the event itself, but because it's a marker, an identity, and a commitment to social cohesion. And I remember when I was first involved with the Muslim community, and I helped guide Isra as an offshoot from Affinity into Islamic Studies at Charles Sturt University. I was the head of school of Charles Sturt University School of Theology at that time. And I remember in many of our earlier conversations, there was great concern about things like media, security, policing, nursing, those kind of issues. And what I have seen is this tremendous commitment to social cohesion, and in some ways the discourse within Islam in Australia has changed over the intervening period, and so that parliamentary iftar, I think, plays a very important part in that, because, as I say, like many of the Affinity events, it's a marker for social cohesion.
Yeah.
Social cohesion is a vital thing to think about at this particular time. It's been sort of top of the pops in the news, and it was even before the COVID virus was spoken of.
That's right.
We had Britain last year appoint a ministry for loneliness. So clearly we're seeing something here about the nature of community. Religion has been marginalised in public discourse for many years, yet it still seems to be a core centre for community and for the nature of community.
Well, I think great religions are, by their very nature, communal. They are social entities. We're not called to be individually solitary followers, in my case, of Jesus Christ, or you're not supposed to be just an isolated individual who observes Islam. I think they are naturally communal and social. It has been certainly difficult, I think, for those of us who are Christian within contemporary Australia, because in a sense we're a tried and tested faith, and sometimes found wanting because we've attracted quite a few scandals in recent years, and we're being called to account for that. And I think we've got a PR, we've got a marketing problem in terms of our own faith in Australia, so there's a kind of critical suspicion. But in times like this pandemic, I think it's also been interesting to see how some churches have been responding in terms of providing resources for care. I belong to a congregation which every week, every day, it is providing food and shelter for homeless people, people at risk, and so on. And they're the people who can quite quickly fall by the wayside. I think also what we have found, and it's interesting making a comparison here with Ramadan, we've just gone through our Easter period, and all of a sudden we had to face an Easter like we've never faced before. We couldn't go to church. And so we had to create, at very, very short notice, online services. And at the end of every online service, we leave the Zoom. I'm not sure if this is giving an advertisement for Zoom, but we leave our Zoom account open. And it's like a Pentecostal pandemonium as people in their various households are all of a sudden communicating with one another and seeing people they haven't been able to see for some time. And so the churches have actually, just by their congregational nature, been able to provide that kind of solidarity. How are you doing? It's good to see you. those kind of very basic necessities.
Which actually helps recover the sense of community in a way, doesn't it?
That's right, yes. It's a different kind of community, but just to say it's detached or virtual is not quite accurate, because I think there is a kind of warmth of connectivity, and people just. I think it makes people feel quite encouraged, really, and not so cut off.
If we could just finally go to your other interest, or back to your other interest, that is the great crisis of the environment and care for God's creation. And Abdullah, I'd pick up your interest in school, particularly Affinity's connection with Amity College. Students, how are students responding to the global crisis around the climate, and how do you see the discussion at Amity College, for instance, between their faith and what's happening in the world around them, particularly things like the climate change? Are kids encouraged to talk about this?
Yes, well, I think first of all, it seems to me the younger generation are quite well aware of climate change and the demands and the need to respond. We've seen climate strikes and marches and what have you. And I think it's sometimes a part of the educational curriculum. So in a sense, young children are becoming quite well aware of the issues. And of course, you only needed to live through Sydney for the first few months of this year to realise just how potentially awkward climate emergencies can be. I mean, quite apart from the virus, we've spent so many months inside this year in the world's third most livable city. So I think
It's a
children are
summer
certainly well aware
inside.
of things. Yes. So children are certainly well aware of things.
Abdullah,
in turn,
from an Amity College perspective, I echo what Clive's saying with our students as well. We do teach them, as part of the curriculum, definitely the awareness about the environment and what's going on. And the example that Clive gave a moment ago around the bushfires, we did, we did fundraising to help out where possible, and you could see kids being very, very, very good in their donations and helping out what was going on, and people sponsoring koalas who had been displaced, etc. So there was a lot of activity that the kids were involved in as well too. So it's very much foremost and in people's minds.
If I might just add to that, I think I think all that activism and practical response is to be applauded. I think I would like to say too that my colleague Mehmet Özel wrote quite a fine paper in a book that's just been published about the Quran and the care of creation. Of course, he's based here in Sydney, and I think some of the insights that Mehmet had in his article, they need to be widely disseminated within the Muslim community. And also, within the Christian tradition, we've had quite a number of very significant ecclesiastical figures who have made public statements about climate change or issued books like Pope Francis. Islamic scientists and theologians back in 2016 released the very fine Islamic Declaration on Climate Change. And I think that it's time that was much more widely known within the Muslim community within Australia. So there you have people who are weaving together the science and the theology.
Clive Pierson, it's great to talk with you. Thank you for giving us the time. Abdullah, do you have a spot for Clive in your continuing discussion with your students?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Clive. It's been wonderful. Thanks for your time.
Well, thank you. It's been good to be with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Clive Pierson, thank you for joining us today for this, the first of our special Ramadan Conversations. We're all in this together, brought to you by the Affinity Intercultural Foundation. You're with John Cleary and Abdullah Aksu. We're here to host a continuing conversation, a Ramadan conversation hosted by the Affinity Foundation. And it's time to meet our final guest for this evening. Lissa McMillan is an Australian journalist with over 30 years' experience in the media, having worked in commercial radio, newspapers, the ABC and SBS. Lissa has managed radio newsrooms and teams across numerous stations in Canberra, Melbourne and Sydney. Lissa, it's good to see you again. Colleagues in the ABC.
And, G'day, John. Lovely to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Look, reflecting on your period as a manager of newsrooms, a challenging summer like the one we've had with both the bushfires and the coronavirus must make you worry about the fact that of all times, news, in particular newsprint and radio and television, are facing a budgetary crisis. And this applies to commercial media and to public media.
Absolutely, John. I think this is one of the more dramatic examples of what's been going on, the decline in what I call quality traditional journalism that's been going on for some while now. And you've been seeing the rise of the social media that has had a great impact now in society. And I think what's going on in the community right now is there is a great demand for quality, fact-based information. And interestingly, just a week ago, the ratings for radio, as you know, John, I'm a big radio fan, and radio ratings came out last week. And they show an increase in news-based listenership, radio listenership overall is going up, which is at a time where such things have tended to be in decline. But the ABC is obviously having an increase because this survey was held, the first week was in the bushfires and the second week was COVID-19. And, you just see this enormous swing. And you've got people, the quality journalists that you have in what I call the quality media, people like Norman Swan, who I think's been doing the most incredible job in this country in giving us fact-based, rational information that people can listen to and feel comfortable with. And I think, as you say, the budgets have been decreasing across all media over a very long time now. And hopefully out of this we may see a reset, a rethinking that, hang on, this might be important to invest some money into this. It's not necessarily a money-making venture, it's a service, it's necessary, and hopefully that, along with a whole lot of other things that I think will be reset as a result of the virus, but maybe a stronger, more independent, healthier, strong editorial service of some description. It could be social media, it could be on any platform, but fact-based quality journalism is needed more than ever at the moment.
We've also seen media go through a period over the last 20 years, which a whole section of the media has decided the way to make money is to divide people rather than to bring them together, to isolate groups and target that group and make them the sole dependee on their version of the truth. That's a great challenge for the sorts of community values that weeks like, or months like Ramadan espouse.
Well, yes, and you've hit the nail on the head. That's exactly why I left media. I haven't got an answer for this, John. I've seen this decline, and I think it's just tragic and sad that we have had a period of great divisiveness, and it's just so unfortunate, and it's very hard to combat because you have the ease of broadcast now with social media where anyone can say anything without fact checking, and it can have a big impact on people's lives, and the negativity and the bullying is just a complete antipathy to what we would expect out of a month such as Ramadan.
Abdullah, how do kids at Amity College, how are they taught to approach these challenges presented by the media today?
Well, depends on which challenges we're talking about. I guess if you could be a bit more specific, John.
Well, just thinking of the way in which the media tends to divide people and set people up against each other. Like it'll demonise whatever the community wants to. And I'm talking about the sort of cheap commercial tabloid media where it says, okay, let's have an anti-Muslim crusade this week, or let's get stuck into the Catholic Church next week. That sort of approach which generates revenue to sectional groups. And kids are being encouraged to see society as a competition rather than a community.
Yeah, so I guess we teach our kids to be level-headed when it comes to those types of articles and whatever's been written or whatever they read, and to also look at alternatives. And if a child has any questions in regard to any topic that they may see on TV or they may see in social media, etc., to come and speak to the teachers at the school or to some of their role models, etc., and try to nip it in the bud in that manner. Social media has got a lot to be held responsible for, because kids do get easily misled or get brainwashed quite easily. So we do have a lot of education in social media, in social media, and the benefits and also the disadvantages of social media. So we try to give the kids a well-rounded education when it comes to the media that they're exposed to.
Lissa, what led you to see value in the work of groups like Affinity and the broader sort of cultural values it represents?
I first became aware of Affinity in the SBS newsroom when we were covering, in fact, Ramadan celebrations in Australia, and we were looking to just show people what happens in a home during an iftar dinner. And I was very impressed with the approach that Affinity was taking to bring people of different faiths, of different backgrounds, of different cultures together. A very, very simple principle of getting an understanding of each other's lives and therefore forming friendships and, in the end, world peace, basically. Incredibly simple. But I just find that the whole philosophy of Affinity, of mutual respect. I was listening to Clive talk about his experiences at some of the parliamentary iftar dinners, and they have been very impressive functions that I've been privileged to go to. You see so many different people from so many backgrounds, different faiths, no faith, politicians, different cultures, all walks of life, but there's a shared purpose and a shared respect. And I just think it's just a great feeling of support for each other. And I just think that if everyone could just be a bit nicer to each other, a bit more tolerant, a bit more understanding, learn about each other, it's really not a very hard concept, but I just think it's very powerful. And I would really like to see that sort of approach to life on Earth, because it's not that long. Why don't we all get on? That's what I see in the Affinity crew, and I think that they do a tremendous job of that.
Abdullah, just a question to you, maybe perhaps an observation you might make to Lissa. Is there any concerns that you as an educationalist would have with the media generally, and something that you'd want to ask of a media professional such as Lissa?
So I guess, put me on the spot, John. At times, Muslims, we get a bad rap in the media. What do you think, Lissa, we as Muslims could be doing better so that we're not susceptible to these types of bad raps that we get in the media?
Yes, and that's one of the jobs that I try to do with Affinity, is work a bit on how the image can be improved. And I think one of the things is to be available to speak and to be able to put forward sensible views, which are held, obviously. It's just sometimes very hard to find representatives to speak, and that's because they're not often very clear who is the representative. It's like talking to the Indigenous community, who is the relevant spokesperson, and I think the media has got to do a lot more research on choosing who is a relevant and appropriate spokesperson for a particular topic. But having more people who are skilled in performing in the media, who are able to answer questions and who don't shy away from this, I think that will help.
Yeah, very good point, and that's probably an area that we as Muslims, we need to get better at. But on the flip side, I guess a sensible answer is not always what the media want, and so it's about that balance as well.
Absolutely, I know, and there are all sorts of media, and that's the struggle at the moment, is there are all such a spectrum of media, and it's more and more, but the professional journalists, as I call them, are becoming fewer and fewer, I believe.
Yeah, sadly.
So finally, Lissa, what do you see as the upside of this summer of extraordinary dislocation and division that we've seen, from the bushfires to COVID-19, and you look at say, look, there has to be an upside to this?
Oh, I think there are lots, actually. I have to admit, I'm quite enjoying it personally. I've had 2 decades of jobs around the house to do that they're getting done right now, so bring on the lockdown. But in all seriousness, I'm seeing more people, at least in Sydney, where people can exercise. Lots of parents out with kids on bikes that are never out. There's a chance that a lot of people will come out of this fitter than they went into it. And just globally, I think it gives us a chance to reset and think about what we value. What are we missing in this, and what would we do differently when we get the chance again to be together and to have normal life back. I think we'll see pollution reduced, we'll see non-essential travel reduced, working from home, work-life balance, the demise of cash in society while we all use cards. I just think there's going to be a whole lot of changes brought on by this period, this very bizarre period of isolation that can be a period of reflection and a chance to reset and maybe make things better at the end of it.
Lissa McMillan, great to have you with us. We've run out of time, so thank you so much for joining us this evening for this Ramadan
Thanks,
conversation.
John.
Thank you, Lissa.
Thanks, Abdullah.
Well, Abdullah, it appears that we've almost run out of time. What would you say, reflecting on summary and listening to what our guests have had to say today? What do you draw out of it?
Very nice. Very pleased with the reflections from Clive and Alyssa, and of course Imam Salih is someone that I've known for years, so his words of wisdom I hold in very high esteem. So it's great. It's good to see people embracing COVID-19 and all that it brings, and also the value that Ramadan has on everyone and the reflections that they have.
Abdullah, it's been great to talk with you this evening as a co-host. Look forward to seeing you several more times on this Ramadan conversation season over the next few weeks.
I look forward to it as well. I look forward to it as well, John.
Yeah, indeed. And thank you also to our viewers and listeners for tuning in to this first of our Ramadan conversations. And tomorrow we'll have a Ramadan conversation that also touches on Anzac Day. Well, stay safe. Have a blessed Ramadan.